I have a confession to make. One could ascribe the term gamer to me.
You need to leave!
Oh, it gets worse. Though my interests have certainly diversified over the years, including long branches into FromSoft games and the Yakuza series, some of my first experiences were with games like Call of Duty 2, Big Red 1. Cringe incoming, but I was 11 and impressionable, just entering middle school. My gym teacher was supportive of me, even though I was a huge nerd, and he reminded me of Sergeant Hawkins in the game. As the leader of your squad in the US 1st Infantry Division, or Big Red 1, Hawkins is a level-headed patriarchal figure that guides you and your boys as you punch your way through the front lines of the Western Front. While in gym class, I saw my efforts as part of a collective, one in which my strengths and weaknesses would be complemented by the others in my class, all under the strong leadership of that particular teacher/squad leader. I tell you this embarrassing story now, not because I enjoy making a fool of myself, but because it illustrates how the media we consume can have reciprocal impacts on our lives, how the stories we are told, and the stories we tell ourselves, and the stories we tell, can be a perpetual Ouroboros. Though I hate war in real life, many of the games I play, even into today, revolve around warfare and combat. So there's an odd dissonance where I admonish the very real practice of warfare, yet engage with it as an escapist fantasy. Perhaps no game is more emblematic of this than in Helldivers 2, a heavily inspired look into a neo-fascist super-Earth, with not-so-veiled references to the totalitarian nature of this world, where suburban bliss is supported by an indefinite sustenance of sacrifice to the state, and colonizing warfare waged on foreign planets. Oh look, he's sympathizing with monstrous bugs and communist robots again. Yes, I am. Also, fascism. Yes, the polar opposite political ideology of communism. A communist film I covered extensively in my last video. A fascist film to cover today? Unfortunately for all the fans of Dirty Harry and Starship Troopers, the way in which today's film covers fascism is not so direct or satirical. No, the film of note today, Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist, explores fascism through an individual and their bouts of psychosis, metastasizes it as a symptom of various neuroses and Freudian symbolisms. And for a director who's explored fascism several times throughout his filmography, it's interesting that the one that is perhaps most poignant is much smaller in scale. So come with me as we explore how Bertolucci's The Conformist contextualizes fascism. Also, for a first on this channel, we'll be covering a film in color, and boy is there color in this movie. The Conformist began life as Il Conformista, a 1951 book by Alberto Moravia. Moravia was a Roman novelist who experienced Italian fascism firsthand, an experience he cited as one that defined the person he became. Having worked with Curzio Malaparte, whose work La Pelle and subsequent film adaptation The Skin, which I would love to cover at some point, also explores fascism and Italian politics post-Allied occupation. Moravia's early career as writer was marred and undermined by Mussolini's dictatorship, having to work under the confines of fascist censorship. And just as Luchino Visconti's wartime past as a partisan who would later influence his own work in neorealism and beyond, Moravia's popularity exploded post-war and resulted in, among several other well-regarded works, Il Conformista, a study of an Ovra employee and his life leading up to his untimely end. The novel, like other Moravia works, is highly introspective and psychological, though we are presented the main character of Marcello in a voyeuristic fashion, as the narrator is omniscient and not Marcello himself. Particularly inspired by Marcel Proust and his use of doubles, the name Marcello even derivative of Marcel, the novel incorporates several elements of fate and destiny presiding over Marcello's life. There are several clues to Marcello's psychology in the book, one of which is actually a passage from the first couple pages. It describes his penchant for collecting little items and the significance they hold to him, the chiefly coveted ones being weaponry. I puzzled over the ordinariness of this description for some time, seeing it merely as the assembling pretext to progress the plot. Marcello's affection for objects, and particularly weapons, leads to him getting in trouble with Lino, a formidable constructive event in his early life. But I believe there's a reason Moravia begins recounting Marcello's life here. If we track the progression of his fixation on objects and the importance they hold for the young boy, we realize his desire for a perceived normalcy is only the natural summit of acquisitions. And there is a reason Marcello can never truly be satisfied, even in achieving normalcy. He was aware, in his own way, of this singular characteristic that property possesses, and while he derived from it an ineffable delight, he at the same time suffered because of it, as he might have suffered over some fault which was continually repeated, and which therefore allowed no time for remorse. His desire for conformity is an affliction, offset by trauma. Rather than process it as memory renews wounds again and again, Marcello wishes to sublimate his emotions, his personhood, into a front for normalcy. In general, Moravia's novel is more than a fictional recounting of one's life, but a critique and debasement of the act of conformity, showing how it can operate as an individual shield from both the horrors of society at large, as well as a way to cope with traumas and abnormalities. Particularly resonant as the modern world grappled with the horrors of World War II, seeing the brink to which fascism can bring a nation of people, and how many not only got off scot-free with such crimes, but rationalized it as following orders. Adapting the work required several concessions and improvements, considering the book's lengthy descriptions and biographical nature. Differences we'll analyze, but first, the film. As always, we will go over what happens in the film so as to provide context for the subsequent analysis. Skip to this time code if you wish to pick up with the analysis. The film opens in a Parisian hotel. Marcello Clerici is waiting in bed while a neon red sign illuminates his face. After receiving a call, he meets with Special Agent Manganiello and goes for a drive. Side note, but Manganiello is an Italian word for a club, particularly ones used by black shirts on their opponents, often combined with a force-feeding of castor oil. The first of many flashbacks occur, this one to 1938 Italy. In a radio station, Marcello is witness to the Italian Andrew sisters performing a song called Who's Happier Than I. Present is his closest confidant, the blind Italo. Marcello explains his plan for marrying his fiancée Giulia as a bid for normalcy. As Italo gives a speech on fascism, Marcello is visited by a colonel, brings him good news about his prospects for a position in Ovra. Visiting the fascist ministry, Marcello is assigned with meeting with a former professor, Professor Quadri, now a prominent anti-fascist, and acquiring intel. Meeting with his fiancée Giulia, she informs him he must visit the priest and confess before they are to be married. On his way to visit his mother, Marcello is followed by his special agent Manganiello. Visiting his mother's estate, Marcello is displeased by the state of the home and his mother's morphine addiction. Marcello has Manganiello eliminate their chauffeur, Alperi, the procurer of his mother's morphine. They visit Marcello's father in an insane asylum to inform him of Marcello's upcoming marriage, and Marcello antagonizes him about his past beating and torturing dissidents in World War I. In the fluid present, Manganiello informs Marcello there's nothing they can do for a woman if they get there in time, and Marcello requests to be let out. This cuts us back to an incident Marcello had as a child. After being bullied by some local children, Marcello is picked up by a chauffeur named Lino. The incident is intercut with Marcello's confession with a priest. In the past, Marcello is lured to Lino's room with the promise of a Mauser pistol. There, Lino attempts to molest Marcello, who apprehends the pistol and shoots all over, including at Lino. Thinking he has killed him, Marcello escapes through the window. Confessing this to the priest, Marcello is dismayed at the priest probing questions about carnal relations, as if it's worse than the murder itself.
Non avete provato alcun orrore per il mio crimine, solamente un po' di stupore perché non sono venuto subito a confessarmi.
Devi pentirti, figliuolo, devi implorare il perdono.
Mi sono già pentito. Voglio che il perdono me lo dia la società. Sì. Mi confesso oggi per la colpa che commetterò domani. È il sangue che lava il sangue. Il prezzo che mi chiede la società, io lo pagherò.
The priest immediately absolves him when he hears that he's a part of Ovra. Italo and his blind community host a party in honor of Marcello's upcoming wedding. Marcello and Italo expound more on what it means to be normal, equating it mostly with fascism. On the train to Paris for their honeymoon, Marcello recites La pioggia nel pinetto, a poem by Gabriele D'Annunzio. Giulia reveals she's not a virgin, having been molested by an elderly family friend as a child. Marcello is uninterested and gets off at Ventimiglia for his designated stop. The stop is a brothel, and Marcello is strangely taken with a prostitute with red hair and a scar across her face. Then he is invited into the office of the weirdo Gabriel, where he receives a counter-order to kill Quadri, but is told he can choose when and where. Giulia continues recounting the story of her childhood, and Marcello begins reenacting it, because he's a fucking freak. In their Paris hotel, Marcello calls Quadri and sets up a meeting at his home. At the apartment, Marcello meets Anna, Quadri's wife, and is transfixed. Meeting with Quadri, Marcello recounts his thesis on the allegory of the cave by Plato. Quadri relates the shadows, the visions of reality, as fascism, and the cave's prisoners as fascists. Marcello forcibly seduces Anna, and later visits her in her dance studio, offering to take her to Brazil with him. She's disgusted by his fascism, but attempts to seduce him anyway, in a plea to prevent him from hurting them. Anna takes Giulia out shopping and tries to seduce her while Marcello spies on them, ignoring Manganiello the whole time. Later, Giulia tells Marcello of the Quadri's home in Savoie. At dinner, Professor Quadri tasks Marcello with sending a letter to a comrade in Rome, and Marcello excuses himself. He is accosted by Manganiello after trying to get rid of his pistol. Manganiello gives him a fascist pep talk. Going out for dancing, Quadri reveals the letter ruse was a test that Marcello passed. The letter was blank, and he knew if Marcello agreed to deliver it, he would have used it against their allies in Rome. Marcello informs Manganiello of the professor's departure to Savoie the following day, and he convinces Anna to stay in Paris with them. Back in the present, Marcello and Manganiello finally catch up with the Quadri's car. Another car stops in front of them. Despite Anna's reservations, Professor Quadri leaves the car to help the stranded car. Meanwhile, a group of men come in from the woods, and then stab the professor to death. Anna makes her escape and attempts to seek help from Marcello, who watches from the car, but does nothing. His cowardice upsets Manganiello, and Anna is pursued by the men, who fatally shoot her. We jump forward in time to the resignation of Mussolini. Marcello and Giulia now have a daughter, but their fortunes have changed significantly. Marcello tucks his daughter Marta in, and Giulia informs him that Italo wants to meet at their usual spot. Before he leaves, Giulia tells him that in Paris, Anna told her Marcello worked for the secret police, but that she responded she didn't care if he did. Marcello meets with Italo, who still has a party pin stuck to his lapel. As they walk, they come across a man propositioning another young man. Marcello realizes it's Lino and confronts him, asking him where he was on the date of the incident, then on the date of the Quadri assassination. As Lino runs away, Marcello loudly accuses him of the murder and of being a fascist pederast. When Italo protests, Marcello yells that he is a fascist too. A crowd of monarchists walk through, and Italo is lost in the crowd. The young man reclines on his bed, in the nude, as Marcello warms himself by a fire. He looks back at the man, but his gaze is fixated upon us as the film ends. Bertolucci was first introduced to the novel The Conformist while editing Spider Stratagem. He was initially too busy to read it, but took the idea to producer Luigi Luraschi, who expressed interest, and within a month, with the book in one hand and a typewriter in another, Bertolucci finished a rough script. Bertolucci and Moravia actually became close friends during this process, often sharing dinners. Unlike some authors, Moravia knew too well that the process of adaptation would require modifications that diverge from the source material. Recounting his conversations with Moravia, Bertolucci recalled, "What is ultimately important is the spirit. Betrayal starts when you move from words to images." He told Moravia that to be truly faithful to a novel, you have to betray it when you make a film from it, and Moravia agreed with him. Having been most inspired by French cinema, Bertolucci saw French talent for a good percentage of the cast and crew. For casting, Jean-Louis Trintignant was the first choice for Marcello, with no screen test being required when Bertolucci first saw him, appearing as a normal-looking man, host to a number of secretive inner lives.
To direct an actor is first of all to give flesh, body, shape to somebody who so far is just a ghost on a page, is somebody who exists only in a literary form on the page of the screenplay.
Brazilian actress Florinda Bolkan was optioned for the role of Giulia, but Bertolucci had Stefania Sandrelli in mind, a by then veteran actress even at 24. Funnily enough, Sandrelli's first film role was in 1961's Il Federale, or The Fascist. Brigitte Bardot was originally considered for the role of Anna, though she was uninterested, and Bertolucci didn't think she was quite the fit. After seeing Dominique Sanda play the role of a dreamy, internally complicated wife in Robert Bresson's Une femme douce, or A Gentle Woman, he knew she would be the perfect choice for Quadri's wife, a sexually liberated, agendered modern woman who can identify the trap brewing in her midst. Remarking on his work with actors, Bertolucci noted how he encouraged experimentation on days of shooting.
I always tell my actors, please surprise me. I need to be fed with surprises. Surprises are nourishing me.
And I believe we see this experimentation several times throughout. Trintignant in particular has several character oddities, such as his sometimes childlike nature and his penchant for treating animals poorly, a callback to his much worse mistreatment of animals from the book. Trintignant would later remark that this was his most interesting role before 2012's Amor, directed by Michael Haneke. The collaborative force of Bertolucci and cinematographer Vittorio Storaro resembles in many ways that of the mutualist partnership of Kalatozov and Yarosevsky from the last video on Soykuba, with the offspring of their collaborations bearing the impressions of both director and cinematographer. The two had met first on Bertolucci's Before the Revolution, where Storaro was the focus puller, and then again for The Spider Stratagem, where Storaro was now head cinematographer. With a close second to The Last Emperor, this, to me, is Storaro's best work. In Bertolucci explaining Plato's allegory of the cave to Storaro and its significance in the story, Storaro was particularly inspired by Caravaggio's painting The Calling of St. Matthew and its division of light and dark into distinct, linear planes. For him, as with the painting, the light became a metaphor for truth, with the darkness being its hiding away. Of course, we end up seeing this phrasing of lighting several times over throughout, most distinctly in the Plato allegory explanation scene between Clerici and Quadri, with Quadri equating the allegory to Italian fascism.
Che cosa vedono? Che cosa vedono?
Lei che viene dall'Italia dovrebbe saperlo per esperienza.
Vedono solo le ombre che il fuoco proietta sul fondo della caverna che è davanti a loro.
Ombre, i riflessi delle cose, come accade a voi altri oggi in Italia.
Se quei prigionieri fossero liberi di parlare, non chiamerebbero forse realtà quelle loro visioni?
Sì, bravo. Scambierebbero per realtà le ombre della realtà.
But we also see it early on with Marcello in his apartment with the blinds, in the Italian fascist ministry, and of course, in the end shot with the fire illuminating Marcello through the bars of a gate. The implicit statement appears to show how Marcello is at least partially enlightened, though his desire for conformity prevents him from embracing truths about himself. Furthermore, when coupled with the cave allegory, we realize that though Marcello is aware of the existence of the land outside the cave, true reality, one he was seemingly close to actualizing upon meeting Anna, when the cave doors open, he is one of the prisoners who wishes to remain inside. Bertolucci never storyboarded his films and preferred a style of improvisation on the day of shooting. There are a lot of unique shots and camera movements in given spaces, and instead of drawing attention to itself or leading to incohesive framing, I find it often pulls viewers in this case. It makes for astounding visuals. Bertolucci and art director Ferdinando Scarfiati conspired to utilize several real locations, particularly for the Rome settings, including several spots in the Esposizione Universale Roma, or EUR, a largely failed architectural concept which was to be the site for the 1942 World Fair, and a commemoration for 20 years of fascism under Mussolini. The project was halted due to the outbreak of World War II, and resumed some years after in a new style. Bertolucci wanted to use the EUR both to contrast fascist Italy with Technicolor Paris, but also to show a place of fascism that emulated Nazism, which in turn had emulated fascism. Composed mostly of architecture in a neoclassical style, it takes on a new significance for this film as the setting of fascist Rome. It's ironic to us, the viewers, as the bleak, brutalist modernity of it makes it feel like a lifeless place out of time, such as the scene of visiting Marcello's father, the asylum setting having been filmed at the Palazzo dei Congressi. Having seen fascism to its feeble end, it also serves as an additional critique of the ideology, the mostly abandoned building project displaying the lofty ideals and failure of its forerunner in Mussolini. In general, a key to the art direction as per Bertolucci was less in recreating the period as it was, but as it felt and as it was depicted in film. In particular, Bertolucci sought to make an amalgamate of cinematic influences, from shadowy noir to Jean-Luc Godard, a primary influence on his career at that point. In yet another instance of art mimicking reality, Bertolucci cited films as the reality basis for which to recreate the world of 1930s Italy and France. In essence, he was the dweller in Plato's cave allegory, the shadows on the wall, motion pictures, a mere representation of reality. And you get a sense of that by viewing this film. It's not a film attempting to recreate the period with accuracy, but in recreating the films of Bertolucci's youth. In particular, I think of the grand scope of authoritarian society in Fritz Lang's Metropolis for the fascist ministry sequences, Godard's Contempt, which is funnily also a Moravia novel adaptation, and the works of pioneering French filmmakers and their aesthetics for much of the Parisian settings. Interestingly, one of the primary aspects of the film that delineates it from the novel, an achronological stream of consciousness presentation of time, almost didn't occur. Bertolucci remarks how, up until this film, he paid little attention to editing, preferring instead to shoot longer as to avoid excessive cuts. But with editor Franco Arcalli on board, Bertolucci slowly learned of the impact of asynchronous edits and how they could impact the story. It is a fascinating accident that they shot enough material to be edited in such a way that shots would line up visually despite being shot out of time with one another, particularly in the frequent flashback and forward of the sequence where Marcello leaves Manganiello's car, cut with being picked up by Lino. Originally, for it to be allowed American distribution, Bertolucci was told to cut 5 minutes from the film. Bertolucci decided to cut an edition of his, a party celebrating Marcello's wedding, hosted by Italo and his blind compatriots. When Paramount re-released the film in 2006 and asked for the print, Storaro rediscovered this sequence in the original negative and sent it off. This sequence is important for a number of reasons. As a Bertolucci creation, the literal blindness of these individuals serves as additional criticism of fascism among Italian citizens. I particularly like this moment where the anti-Duce, Senegalia, is beaten by another partygoer, and instead of denouncing the man who beat him, Italo chides Senegalia for his unpopular opinion.
Ora basta! Senigallia? Dove sei? Hai ricominciato, eh? La lezione dell'altra volta non ti è bastata. Smettila di piangere.
Of course, the scene also serves as pivotal character development for Marcello and Italo's relationship, far more than the earlier scene in the radio station. Marcello talks more of the normality he seeks, seemingly gauging Italo for answers, though Marcello seems to have made up his mind that whatever normalcy he wishes to attain, it will have to involve fascism.
Com'è un uomo normale, secondo te?
Un uomo normale? Per me l'uomo normale è quello che si volta per la strada per guardare il sedere di una bella donna che passa e scopre che non è il solo ad essersi voltato, e ce ne sono almeno 5 o 6, ed è contento se scopre gente uguale a lui, i suoi simili. Perciò gli piacciono le spiagge affollate, le partite di football, i bar del centro
E le adunate oceaniche a Piazza Venezia.
Piazza Venezia was often the gathering site for many of Il Duce's speeches.
Ama quelli che sono come lui e diffida di quelli che sente diversi. Per questo l'uomo normale è un vero fratello, vero cittadino, vero patriota,
Vero fascista.
Ti sei mai chiesto com'è che siamo amici? Perché noi due siamo diversi dagli altri. Siamo animali della stessa razza. Marcello, sei qui? Ma che c'è, non sei d'accordo? Ah, ma lo so che sei d'accordo. Io non mi sbaglio mai.
Once again, the film elevates the text not only with this addition, but with the enabling of Gentignon's performance and the dramatic irony presented. Because he is blind, Italo cannot discern the dismayed expression on Marcello's face, or its somewhat purposeful distancing from Italo. The idea is slowly dawning on Marcello that Italo is not the figure he wishes to identify with. He is subtly rejecting his notion that they are two of a kind, different from the others. This could be because Italo is blind, further exemplified by his mismatched shoes. Italo states he is a perfect judge of character and is never mistaken, offset by the visual metaphor that he may indeed be mistaken in some areas. But Marcello doesn't want to be different from the others. He's felt different all his life and wants to be indistinguishable so as not to draw attention. Italo may also be implying that their difference is their sexuality. As Marcello confides in Italo what he keeps hidden from others, it is possible he has divulged of the formative experience with Lino. Or maybe Italo is simply so astute in his discernment of character that he's deduced Marcello's sexuality over time, and is stating, "We're not like the others in this respect." But at this phase of the story, Marcello wishes to downplay, if not bury, this aspect of himself. Regardless, this whole experience with the wedding party serves to disturb Marcello greatly. We get key moments where the blind's difference is highlighted, elevated. Someone drops a tray and the whole party stops for a moment.
Niente, è caduto un vassoio. Porta bene, felicità.
Partygoers bump into tables. Italo at one point gets a balloon string wrapped around his neck and requires Marcello's assistance, which is a cool take that seemingly just happened and they improvised around. It's a shame the scene was cut in its entirety for much of its American release, as it does so much for both characters, and heightens Marcello's later betrayal of Italo. Also, what a wonderful setting in a basement, literally underground, with windows to the street life looking up. I think of how, though the majority of the blind depicted are fascists, they're still sequestered from the society they're loyal to. Last note for production.
Musica.
The music by Georges Delerue.
Eseguirò per voi l'ultimo fostrò del maestro Delerue. Abbracciami.
God, it's so good. The main theme in particular comes up everywhere and emphasizes the melancholia of Marcello's situation. There's a tragedy in that there's so many opportunities for him to turn his life around that we know he will never take. As long as his altered psychological foundation remains the same, he is essentially doomed. Side note, Delerue also did the amazing music for Godard's Contempt, which also features the Casa Malparte as a frequent set, which was the home Curzio Malaparte built for himself in Capri when placed under house arrest. Additionally, there are at least 2 songs of note. The Italian Andrews sisters and their song, Chi è più felice di me, or Who is happier than I, an intentional contrast meant to show that Marcello, having announced his marriage to a petty bourgeois and about to work for Ovra, believes he's about to embark on a normal life. Additionally, the end song, Come l'ombra, or Like the Shadow, also sung by a trio of sisters, is perfectly emblematic of the film's final themes. Though Bertolucci chose it by chance on the way to the studio, and it wasn't even the music used on set, its lyrics concern a pesky shadow, maybe a literal one, or a person by their side. Opting for some Jung to balance the Freudian psychoanalysis in this film.
The incoherent rage.
But might that not be caused by your insistence on the exclusively sexual interpretation of the clinical material?
Maybe it's the shadow of Marcello, the parts he's hidden away for most of his life to appear normal, the shadow that's likely exploded over when he least expects it. The reason most of Marcello's relationships fail is because he hasn't assimilated his shadow. He's not a fully well-rounded individual. He mostly only presents to the world the person he wants them to see. There's also something oddly sorrowful and ominous about the song, which may be due in part to its recording quality. Regardless, funny accidents all around. Production took place in 2 phases, one prior to Christmas of 1969, and the other over 2 to 3 weeks in January and February of 1970. The finished film initially debuted at the 20th Berlin International Film Festival on July 1st, 1970, competing for the Golden Bear. But because of controversy over the film OK, the festival was disbanded after 3 days. Nonetheless, it went on to screen successfully throughout Italy in early 1971 and later in select screenings in the US. The film was largely successful, launching the careers of Bertolucci and Storaro in particular. In an interesting vignette that somewhat parallels Marcello's search for a father figure, Bertolucci recounted how, after a viewing of the film, he was visited by his filmmaking idol, Jean-Luc Godard. From his interview with Stuart Jeffries about the incident, I used to think there were cinema before Godard and cinema after, like before and after Christ, so what he thought about the film meant a great deal to me. Jean-Luc arrives at Bertolucci's flat, having seen the film, gives him a postcard, and leaves. The note card with a picture of Chairman Mao on the front reads in Godard's signature handwriting, "You have to fight against individualism and capitalism." Upset, Bertolucci crumbles up the note and threw it away, though later he regretted doing so as he wished he could have kept it as a relic of sorts. I'll be real with you guys, I'm not a fan of Godard. Like, at all. Yes, he was one of the most influential French New Wave filmmakers in terms of what experiments he could pull with the medium. Yes, he influenced generations of great filmmakers all over. To me, his films come off as nothing more than the pretentious musings of a reformed bourgeois dilettante who doesn't actually have anything to say, but whose bloated, pseudo-didactic visual prose is present to compensate for any actual meaning. Actually, I'll let Craig from Welcome to the Basement take this away.
The problem is that his movies often, and this one is the ultimate example of that, are an endurance test. They're challenging the audience to unreasonable degrees.
I think he wants us to hate it.
Yeah.
So just talking about how much we hate it just turns him on. If he's watching this, he's like, oh, good, it still works after all these years. And it just makes me resent him that much more. The only thing we can do to fight Jean-Luc Godard is to ignore him.
Thanks, Craig. And I preface this obvious bias with the understanding of his influence, especially with Bertolucci himself, whose Before the Revolution is very much inspired. But this encounter makes me wonder strongly whether he actually viewed the Conformist, or if he went, "Oh, a fascist protagonist that is identifying with fascism," and wrote Bertolucci a stupid-ass card. Because I don't know how one could see this film and see it as being not strong enough in its critique of fascism, or of its fascist protagonist. Marcello is utterly despicable on all fronts, doesn't even face any sort of reform, and he is worse off for it. Reflecting on the experience, Bertolucci noted 2 reasons Godard may not have liked the film. The first, I had finished the period in which to be able to communicate would be considered a mortal sin. He had not. And the nod to Godard Bertolucci inserted where Professor Quadri's phone number and address is that of the real-life Godard.
Je voudrais me dire 1537.
He says, so you can see that I was the conformist, wanting to kill the radical. And in an odd way, I believe he did. I think particularly of Godard's La Chinoise, a very loose adaptation of Dostoevsky's Demons, and what it attempted to say about American imperialism, radical leftist politics, and the like, and how it failed to do what Bertolucci did with The Conformist. And perhaps that's the point with La Chinoise, that we're supposed to be supremely annoyed by the pretentious middle-class French students cosplaying as Maoists.
Le marxisme-léninisme? Définir? Vous savez, quand le soleil se couche, il est tout rouge, et puis après il disparaît. Mais pour moi, dans mon cœur, le soleil se couche jamais.
That we're supposed to identify with real committed leftist Francis Janson as he dissuades the ineffectual ideas of the character of Veronique on the train, and that Godard is laughing as I squirm in my seat watching this film because that's the point. But the efficiency and sheer depth with which Bertolucci is able to communicate similar ideas purely outpaces that of Godard. This is not a plea for more cut and dry films, or ones that follow a standard Hollywood 3-act structure, as The Conformist prompts much work and speculation on the part of the audience. This is merely a request for more substantive films that actually hold key messages, elevated by the visual medium. This isn't a film that adheres to conformity, but if its opting for a less obtuse mode of storytelling is killing the radical, then it's better off for it, because you have to fight against pretentiousness and superficiality. Dorado refers to how after The Conformist, people viewed his work differently, and it enabled him to work with a variety of directors thereafter, particularly Coppola for Apocalypse Now and Warren Beatty for Reds. Storaro is, rightfully so, considered one of the greatest cinematographers of all time, and it shows this early in his career with his bold transformations of the visual medium, in particular his work with color, light, and shadow. But like with Soy Cuba, The Conformist proved to be just as influential later in America, as renowned movie brats Coppola, Spielberg, and Scorsese were all strongly impacted by it. Coppola in particular used elements from the film in his 1974 The Godfather Part 2, in its chiaroscuro cinematography heightened with pops of color, its story of a deeply afflicted protagonist and the degradation of his soul. And oh look, it's Manganiello! Gastone Moschin returns as the despicable Don Fanucci. Largely typecast as a goon according to his appearance, it's cool to see a real dirtbag at work. His contribution on The Conformist cannot be understated. It's one of the only looks at a die-hard right-winger as a cudgel to Marcello's ineffectual nature. Even in the modern day, the Conformist still leaves its mark, with the renowned Baron Pines episode of The Sopranos paying direct homage, as Polly and Chris chase a Russian mobster through a similarly snow-covered woods. Of course, the final product of this film is almost wholly different from its source material.
Nel romanzo di Moravia, che è un grande romanzo tragico secondo me, c'è la presenza del destino, come nelle tragedie classiche. Bene, nel mio film il destino non c'è più. Nel mio film la funzione del destino è stata presa da qualcos'altro, e cioè dall'inconscio del personaggio.
Chief to the process of adapting Moravia's novel to screen was to change the plot circumstances from revolving around fate and prophetic events, seemingly determined by higher power, and place them in the real world. In an interview with Marilyn Golden for Sight and Sound, Bertolucci describes his aim thusly: in the sense that in the book, the story of the Conformist is a tragedy, and, as in the Greek tragedies, everything is related to fate. Here I substituted Marcello's unconscious, a psychoanalytic explanation, that is, for the presence of destiny in the book, and that's also why I changed the end of the story. In the novel, Marcello and his wife are killed, and this is presented as God's justice. Transforming destiny into the unconscious, of course, also affects the rapport between sexuality and politics. A subtle way this feat is achieved is through the film's achronological presentation, as opposed to the novel's purely chronological one. As I mentioned, this happened partly through accident, as the editor Franco Arcali revealed it was possible to cut the film asynchronously. But the effect it has is in putting the story's perspective squarely in the mind of Marcello. Memories come to him in full force, prompted by something occurring in his present. It makes it less of us being a passive observer of Marcello's life events, but putting our viewing of it through Marcello's eyes. Then, of course, there's the psychoanalytic through line, for which we're about to get a little Freudian. The book uses some combination of Greek tragedy, Proustian archetypes and doubles, and fate to explain Marcello's disposition. The book's Anna character is actually named Lina, a deliberate double opposite to Lino, acting more as a mother surrogate for Marcello. As noted by Daniel Lopez for Novel into Film, Bertolucci's The Conformist for Film Quarterly. Whereas Lino has corrupted Marcello sexually, Lina is meant to liberate him again, though he is just as helpless to change her sexuality as she is to change his psychology. In the book, parallel events are also presented between Marcello and Giulia. The film keeps the aspect of Giulia having also been molested as a child, something which disturbingly excites Marcello as she recounts it. But there's further parallels with their respective sexualities later in life. Marcello has a homosexual encounter with an older Englishman and is offered a gardenia, matched with Giulia being offered one by a nightclub proprietress later. In the book's ending, Marcello and Giulia's deaths on a road line up with the Quadri's killing on a road. All this was likely interesting to Bertolucci, who used themes of psychoanalysis and even doubles, particularly in his previous films, Partner and The Spider Stratagem. But for the sake of conciseness and realism, the only genuine doubles we get are the appearances of Dominique Sanda as the woman in the ministry and the prostitute, which works just as well as establishing Marcello's POV as being our POV. The film still allows Marcello a degree of agency not afforded in the novel. With Marcello's institutionalized father and a morphine-addicted mother, his search for normalcy is expedited by his search for a father figure. Bertolucci adds the character of Italo to make the figures at least two and diametrically opposed. Italo, sounding like Italy, is the model fascist, while Quadri, the leftist intellectual. Both are appealing to Marcello in his search. For Quadri, an appeal to Marcello's scholarly sensibilities, and an alternative to fascist authoritarianism. For Italo, a sympathetic ear to his plight, a representation of brotherhood. But their flaws lead to Marcello's rejection of them, in both cases to their doom. Quadri in the novel is a deformed hunchback, seemingly a physical manifestation of his ideology. But more so, he represents the inefficacy of intellectualism deprived of action. When fascism first begins taking over Italy, Quadri's only recourse is to leave to Paris in hopes that his and his other professors' exile will be an effective form of protest. Like Duke Leto Atreides of Dune, he also allows Marcello into his graces despite knowing full well he's a fascist and likely a spy, in some vain optimism that he can convert him. This optimism proves to be his downfall later when he exits his car to help a car crash victim, despite all the auspicious signs not to. Italo is blind, which is not to say he's not able-bodied as anyone else. It's more a wink that despite his apparent wisdom, he has some blind spots, particularly in his political ideology and his judge of character. Marcello appears to begin rejecting him once they have a heart-to-heart at the wedding party, where Italo explains how the two are not like the rest. Because Marcello doesn't want to be different, he already feels alienated because of what happened to him as a child. If we read this in light of the gay subtext, i.e. Italo insinuating that duo's sexuality makes them different from society, this is even more severe for Marcello, whose homosexual encounter in his youth is a catalyst for disgust and rejection. So the ultimate father figure in the film, the one Marcello ultimately chooses, is that of fascism, a choice which befits an ideology whose tenets lie in an authoritarian leader, military might, and forcible oppression. Though as we've mentioned, Marcello isn't even a particularly committed fascist. Sure, he's disturbed that his wife is dancing with a woman, but he's mostly just a schoolboy reciting Latin and poetry, strongly averse to committing violence himself, and only sees fascism as a route to normalcy, one he half-heartedly takes up. But as with his real father, the ultimate patriarch of fascism fails, with the Italian fascist state and its figurehead being the first Axis power to fall in the war. Another major change is how the assassination of the Quadris is handled. In the book, Marcello isn't even present for its happening, instead cutting to 6 days after it occurred, finding out about it in the newspaper headlines after having returned from Paris. Sure, there's an element of shock to this omission, that the Quadris are there one moment and gone the next, while Agent Clerici gets out without dirtying his hands. But here, Bertolucci saw an opportunity for a fantastic sequence and character development. As we know, Marcello's car ride to the site of the assassination comprises much of the film's framing device, and it's where the resurgence of all his past memories occur. It also provides a tangible tension as Marcello grapples with the idea of potentially saving Anna. Here Marcello is given an arc of redemption, one so within our grasp that fails due to his supreme cowardice. Of course, it also allows us to see what was merely described in a journalistic brief in the novel. The Ministry stages a dastardly trap and horrifically kills the Quadris. The visual memory of the experience also heightens the trauma which Marcello experiences after the fall of fascism. It's one thing to know you're responsible for political murders you weren't there to witness, another to see them firsthand and do nothing about them. Our filmic introduction to Marcello is just as important a divergence, as the medium can hardly maintain the book's life story given its runtime. These first few scenes with Marcello are stylized using motifs and creating a mood akin to a spy film, a noir, or a political thriller. We're subtly projecting how icy cool our new protagonist is, using the sum of our acquired filmic conventions. But it doesn't take long before we realize who we're really dealing with. Whereas in the novel, having been privy to Marcello's insidious nature from childhood, there is no element of surprise, and no subversion of archetypes. It's likely the reason I also like Otomoto's The Sword of Doom upon first viewing. Not knowing Nakadai's Ryunosuke and who he was, I started the film thinking he would be a skilled, noble samurai like so many I'd seen previously. Then in the first 5 minutes, he cuts down an old pilgrim for sport. It's an inversion that is rarely found nowadays, with most films opting to make their unlikable protagonists at least relatable, or follow an arc where they improve. Marcello, on the other hand, becomes more unlikable as the film goes on. He never even advances the plot with much agency. The assassination plot and much of the prior investigation is performed by Manganiello, and the agents wouldn't even have known the Quadri's location had Giulia not revealed it to Marcello. Interestingly, Marcello isn't even a particularly good fascist, it merely being a popular mantle for him to take up to blend into society. His fascist foil is presented in Manganiello, a violent and loyal ally to the state, whose beliefs perfectly align with the rightist wings of fascist tenets. And this is because, even with one party in power, a nation's populace does not wholly align with one set political ideology, nor is there a binary of for and against. Also, I'm more than a little baffled by this scene.
L'azione dovrà essere pronta e decisa. Camerata!
So first there's a prostitute for Marcello who is just Dominique Sanda in a red wig, scar, and fez. And yet I know in the novel she looks like the Lena Anna character and he's strangely attracted to her. Why is she made to say these strange lines?
Sono pazza.
Then we get this absolute weirdo in the Gabriel character whose office is lined with walnuts that he meticulously cracks, seemingly not even to eat, but just to do it. Then Marcello, you absolute madman, he gets a gun and starts pointing it. The dude's like, oh my god, stop. And then he points it at his fucking head and is like, oh wait, I forgot my hat.
Il cappello? Ho perduto il cappello. Dov'è?
What? Like, I've been known to reach with scene interpretations, I just have no idea what's going on. It's a Buñuel fever dream. The ironic thing here is that these stills of him pointing the pistol was often used for publicity material, even though in the scene he's just kinda goofing off with it like a kid and not being a cool spy or something, though that's how the posters choose to present him. In general, a lot of publicity material depicts him as this cool Alain Delon Le Samurai type, despite the fact that he's not that at all. He's actively averse to the gun, wanting to give it to Manganiello at a point in the film. He's an absolute coward. But I certainly don't mean to say all this as detraction. I think it's very fun to watch this scene, but it is so baffling, and all these details have no equivalent in the novel. In the book, he just goes to the brothel, gets his mission details from Gabriel, no gun, sees the girl Lucia who is waiting on Orlando/Manganiello, is too embarrassed to do anything about it, and leaves. Marcello's confrontation with Lino goes quite differently in the novel. Lino is a park keeper who interrupts Marcello and Giulia beginning to have sex in a park. It's actually played out quite theatrically. Lino remarks how it was actually someone else who died in the hospital bed next to him, and that he went on mostly unchanged. Marcello is like, "You act like nothing happened," and Lino says, "We all lose our innocence, one way or another. It's the normal thing," and then leaves. And Marcello is like, "Wow, so even if I didn't kill Lino, then I would have lost my innocence one way or another." It's honestly a low point in the novel. If not taken literally, it could be an interesting revelation revealed to Marcello in the form of hallucination, as if it's really his conscience making this discovery. But the passage suffers from its anticlimax, divergent behavior from its characters, and how much is spelled out in Marcello's mind. In the film, Lino doesn't even know Marcello, or remember him. It's Marcello who recognizes him as he's propositioning another young youth, showing that the young Marcello was just one of many such victims of Lino. Marcello's filmic accusing Lino of the murder of the Quadris also displays the downfall of his psyche. He blames the circumstances of his current state on an event that occurred in his youth. Of course, then, this precipitates his outright rejection and attempt at persecuting Italo as well. It shows how destructive of a force his striving for conformity is, one that kills the ones who stood by him all along. The novel ends with Marcello, his wife and child, fleeing in a car. A Deus Ex plane does a strafing run on the car, which kills his wife and child. Marcello staggers out of the car, then resigns himself to his fate when the plane returns. It's an ending straight from a Greek tragedy, with Marcello being punished for his mortal sins. First, the innocents are eliminated, then himself, seemingly by divine intervention. Bertolucci improved on this by making Marcello's destruction more a psychological one. We can imply, because of the anti-fascism momentum post-liberation, that Marcello doesn't have much longer on this earth. Or perhaps he'll escape to Argentina, but that's not what matters. It's that when all is said and done, knowing what he knows about himself, Marcello will never leave the cave. Like shadows in a cave, movies are a transfiguration of true reality. Even hyper-literal works such as Andy Warhol's Empire are manipulated and injected with artistic intent to shift representation. One of the Conformist's many strengths is its timelessness. It doesn't just show Italian fascism and go, "Look, isn't this bad?" Bertolucci has often said that the film is about the present, and I wondered what he meant by this. I stated in my Soy Cuba video that often a certain amount of time should transpire after a historical event for people to fully rationalize it and commit it to some form of representation. This is perhaps why there wasn't too much relevant media following World War II about fascism concretely. There are exceptions, of course, but they're mainly recreating what happened for the screen. Perhaps true understanding occurs when people start to forget. Cultural amnesia sets in the modern day with every news cycle, as we are inundated with new events more and more frequently. Though this was less severe decades prior, the same amnesia still occurred, especially as the conclusion of World War II paved the way for a long drawn-out Cold War. It was this period in which Bertolucci wanted to make a culture of memory to fascism, especially Italy's original fascism, so as to remind the present. This film was made in the wake of May '68, a series of protests, strikes, and occupations that occurred in France. Godard and François Truffaut were heavily involved in that year's Cannes Film Festival's cancellation, citing support for the protests against the violence, police repression, which is an assault on the nation's cultural liberty, the secular traditions of its universities, and its democratic principles. Bertolucci remarked how the Proustian influence on this novel and film were subject to scrutiny, both in the time Proust lived in and in 1968. Proust, in those years, almost became a dirty word. It was an injustice comparable to that perpetrated by anti-Semitism. But Proust lovers have been vaccinated against fads and fashions, and felt instinctive repugnance for those views. Funnily enough, one of the oft-cited texts of 1968 was Wilhelm Reich's The Mass Psychology of Fascism, a work that posits how sexual repression was a key tenet of fascism. Something shown in a work like Starship Troopers, where sexual urges are sublimated into performance for an authoritarian state.
Make it 20 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And there are elements that make its way into the Conformist. Marcello hides his homosexuality and thus hampers his full development, and embraces fascism as a means to be accepted. But this is an oversimplification of the Conformist impact. The significance is that Marcello is not a fascist, but a bourgeois liberal. Like us, he wants to live comfortably and withdraw into society, to keep things the way they are, and he will go to great lengths for that semblance of normalcy. Any critiques of decadence on this film, like Godard likely would have articulated, are not meant to stylize fascism, but to lull the liberal viewer into a sense of security, cajole them into thinking Marcello may be redeemable, only to take that hope away. The old adage goes, scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. I can point to a number of examples today where that rings true. Though The Conformist was made 54 years ago, depicting events decades before its time, its truth will always be about the present. Hello everyone, thanks so much for watching if you made it through all the way. This is another one of my favorite movies by an Italian director. Let me know in the comments if you've seen this one or had any thoughts about it. I'd love to hear what you had to say, and I'll get back to you as well. Next video is in the works. We'll be analyzing a certain movie, which also had a basis in reality, a book adaptation of the historical events, and a play adaptation, so I'll be analyzing all four, and it's another one of my favorites, so stick around for that. Hope you have a good day. I'll see you around.